Welcome to Ultra Catalyst. I'm your host, Stephen Nosek. We'll be exploring the one decision people make to drive change in their lives. Join me each week to hear from a variety of guests about what they did, the techniques and strategies they used, and how they're now leading their best lives.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Ultra Catalyst podcast. My name is Stephen Nosek. You know all about us. You've been watching a lot of our podcasts over the last few months. Now, let's get right into it. Today is going to be a shorter episode. It's just going to be me battling myself back and forth, talking about a topic that's near and dear to my heart. And trust me, you're going to want to hang out the entire time. Feel free to post a question, send a DM or like, and tell your friends about this episode. I know you're going to want to come back to our podcast channel and check out all the other things that we've been talking about over the last few months and the guests that we have coming up in the next few weeks. So today's topic, what we're going to be talking about is becoming present. Now, Stephen, what do you think that means? Well, to me, becoming present means that you are aware of your surroundings and you're engaged in the conversations that are around you with the people that are part of the conversation. Now, a lot of times when we interact with folks, it's usually all about us. And as we're talking and communicating with these other individuals, whether if that's your friends, your family, your coworkers, your associates, your employees, people that you just run into at the store, maybe the same person you see over and over again at the gym or at the club you go to, the bar, wherever it is, right? Now, think through those conversations. A lot of times in dialogue, what's happening is you're already forming your response to whatever someone else is talking about, and you don't let them finish what they're saying. So you've already thought about your statement, your position, your opinion. You've already formulated it, yet you don't even understand or hear exactly what the person's trying to say. Now, as you know, the result is people get frustrated. I get that way. I know you do as well, right? Is we're having a conversation, you start talking over someone else. Not that you're finishing their sentence. Now that's something else, but you start interrupting them. You're not paying attention. Your mind is somewhere else. Not to mention, you want the conversation to be all about yourself or something that you think is the appropriate tone or direction of the conversation, right? And now what happens here? A lot of people start to feel disrespected. They feel that the conversation is exceeding the boundaries that they're trying to set. And it's nobody's fault exactly. It just, you're two people that want to have a conversation, but you have so much to talk about that you're not really ready and able to listen to everybody's side of whatever story it is that they're telling you, or even the conversation. Now, think about it. Sometimes you end up talking over people. Maybe you're listening to your significant other and she's telling you about her day or about something that she watched on YouTube or Netflix or listened to a podcast or read in an article. Now, what happens sometimes is you're just nodding your head, understanding what she's saying, and you're already starting to formulate how can I get to the next part of the conversation, whether if that's slow down, speed up, change the subject, whatever it is. Sometimes that happens. I mean, I do it. I can't guilty of it. I know you are as well. Now, what does this happen? Well, it starts to lead to little arguments, which turn into fights, which turns into silence, which eventually turns into resentment. Now, does it always happen this way? No, not at all. Sometimes everybody's on the same page, you're listening, you're interacting, you're talking about a mutual subject, or I should say a subject that both parties or multiple parties are passionate about. And those times are awesome because now you're exchanging ideas and you're in the zone where you're actually able to listen to the other person. Now, if you think about it, how many times are you having conversations throughout the day with others where you just tune out. You stop listening to them. You're getting distracted by your cell phone or by some sort of ping on your computer, maybe your email. Maybe there's some background noise way off in the distance that's consuming your attention and not for the people in front of you. Now, think about how much energy you're wasting when you do that. Your 2-3 minute conversation with that other person could mean the world to them. But instead, you've prolonged it by not paying attention. You've probably had to ask the person to repeat themselves 3 or 4 times. You played them off. You disregarded what they were talking about. It amounts to a whole lot of energy that's wasted and a lot of frustration. Now, also, if you're like me, sometimes when that happens, in turn, you get frustrated because you don't recognize the other person is getting irritated because you're not listening to them. And in turn, you feel that you're the one that's in the right, and now they're frustrating you. Now, I can't speak about all the different scenarios, but I can say guilty as charged. And I bet you can too. If you really step back and think about it, sometimes we get so worked up about how the other person is responding to us being disinterested in the conversation we're part of with them that we're getting frustrated. And it's taking a toll on our emotions. We're starting to change the way we talk, the tone, the mannerisms, the behaviors. Sometimes we're just like, shit, I just want the conversation to end. So we start planning all these different exit strategies. Now, as you could imagine, this doesn't serve everybody, let alone you, because that one quick conversation where you're listening to someone else, that could be 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes. Well, guess what? If both of you get frustrated, just think about how long you're carrying the thoughts of that and replaying it through your head throughout the day. It could be 5 minutes and you're just like, F it, I'm over it. Or it could be a few hours where it just stews in you and you're like, man, I really feel someone threw a bunch of shade on me for no reason, right? Well, sometimes you got to just look at it from a different perspective. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about becoming present. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about some different techniques that you might be able to use and employ when you get to that point to become more present in the conversation. Now, first and foremost, these techniques, they work. They might not work for you in different scenarios. Also, sometimes you might get so far ahead of yourself that you're not listening to someone or you're over listening to them, and then they're getting frustrated. So you have to be mindful, right? Conversation is dialogue where there's a give and take. It can't always be you just giving, and it can't always be just you taking. There's got to be some sort of equilibrium. It doesn't mean that it's going to be equal. It just means that you're going to have to engage in some back and forth where you're going to have to use different techniques. Now, the first one I want to talk about is active listening. Now, you probably know what this is, or maybe you've heard it, you've read it tons of different times in every personal development book or psychology book that you've read out there. If you're taking any leadership courses within your company, or if you've ever been in the corporate world, you know exactly what active listening is. So let's just recap for those that might not be aware or those that just kind of forgot about it, because once you learn something and you're not using it on a regular basis, it's pretty easy to get dust on that tool in your tool belt. So let's dust some of that stuff off. Now, active listening, this is where you remove the distractions around you and you listen intently to the words and the nonverbal cues that the other person is talking about. And you let them finish. Now, some ways that you could do that is when you lean forward, right? Now you're more engaged. You're getting in direct eye contact with them, whether if you're on the video screen or in person, or even if you're in the telephone. They could typically feel how you're sitting, the excitement within your voice, right? This is all these different techniques that you've already mastered because you're a human being. Sometimes you're just not cognizant or conscious of how to interact, especially if you're trying to listen to someone else. So active listening is being able to Listen and digest what the other person is talking about before forming your opinion or your response. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of times we're reactionary. We hear different words that trigger us for whatever reason, some emotion or association to some event in the past that now we're on the offense and we're just going to volley back as fast as we can, right? Now, if you practice active listening, you're going to insert a little pause and you're going to start to use different phrases of recapping what they just said. So they understand that you heard, you listened, and you understood what they were talking about. So, for example, someone might be talking about their day and they describe a situation or a scenario in descriptive detail. Well, you might say, "Oh my gosh, that sounds great. I loved when you're talking about this particular environment and how you felt. Can you dig a little bit deeper in there?" Now, while I may give it an example that's more investigatory or investigative, you don't have to go and make it an interrogation, right? You're really just picking up something in their story and being able to provide a response based on that, right? You might even ask the question of, "Oh, I'm not sure I fully understand what you're talking about here or what you mean by that. Can you explain or give me another example of that?" Right? And these aren't anything that's negative in that sense. It's really getting the other person to clearly explain so you could understand and digest what they're talking about, right? That way they feel that you are part of the conversation and you're not just spitting back stuff out there to appease them, make them feel good about themselves. And mind you, you may do some of that, right? You may congratulate them based on the results, not the effort of what they're dealing with. Or maybe you walk them through different areas that they're struggling with. But the whole point of active listening is to be intentional and let them speak. Now, you might not even talk for several minutes because you're so interested in listening to what they're talking about. Now, that brings me to another point is you got to be able to remove the distractions. It's so easy to have your cell phone chime, have some sort of vibrate mode, have some sort of notification on it, right? Have you ever gone to dinner somewhere with your family member, friend, significant other, coworkers, whatever, and half the time people are looking at their phone? Do it next time you go to a restaurant. Sit there in silence and observe another table or two or three. How many people are interacting? Are people laughing? Are they talking? Are they fighting? Does everybody have their heads in their phone? And you got just that ambient light coming up. And then occasionally they'll put it down. They'll laugh about something. They'll share a story that they just read on their phone with the person next to them. And then 2 minutes later, they'll go back to looking at their phone. Well, in those times, you want to put the phone away. Put it in your pocket, put it in your purse, leave it in your car, whatever it is. You want to make sure that you're present in the conversation because that's where you're going to start building that relationship with whoever it is that you're engaging with. And the key thing about active listening is at the end of the day, you're really building trust and you're forging a tighter relationship. Not to mention, now it's more collaborative. This person over time will be more receptive to sharing more things with you. It might present new opportunities or new things you didn't even think about when building or fostering this relationship with the other person. And like I said before, this could be your children. Maybe they want to play with you and you're so caught up in what you're doing that you're not allocating the time. Well, you know what? Sometimes, especially if it's with kids, maybe you got to get down on one knee or come to their level and listen. Ask them to explain it, repeat themselves. What is it that they want to do? And before you say no, just remember the invested time at the younger years is going to pay dividends as they get older. especially for some of us that have come from households where it was one or a partial 1.5 times of a parent not being around, right? In those times, you might not have anybody to talk to. And you're not learning some of those dialogue skills that I just talked about, right? Active listening. Now, another topic that I want to talk about when it comes to becoming present is spontaneous interaction. Now, you want to practice this? Go to a public place or a restaurant or fast food or convenience store or wherever it is, and just start talking to other people. Get to know them. Don't ask them about their jobs. Don't ask them about the weather. Don't ask them about what kind of car they drive, right? Find something interesting to compliment them on where you could start talking about other things that they might be interested in. It could be their shoes, right? There's a lot of sneakerheads nowadays. Read up on those things. Call someone's shoes out. Yeah, it might feel a little weird, but you know what? If you recognize the way that someone's dressed in a positive manner, they're more inclined to speak with you. Well, depending on where you're at, there are some areas where people will kind of give you the bird and look at the ground. But then again, those people aren't open to talking and making friends in those moments, right? They may be a little more introverted. Now, another piece is you may want to do handwritten notes or schedule or book time, right? It's all about becoming present for the people around you. That means you may have to recognize them. And I'm not saying may have to, I'm saying it's a great idea. You should do it to show that you are actually paying attention to what they're doing. It's not just the conversation you're having today, it could be recalling the conversation you had months ago, right? Always remembering that people like to hear different things about themselves. And not to forget, when you're communicating with other people, always use their name multiple times. Imagine it. If you hear your name when you cross the finish line, how much more stoked are you than if you don't hear your name at all? Right? The same thing is if you are being called in a supermarket or at an airline. Well, you know what? You recognize your name very quickly, and people want to be recognized. And the more present you are with people, and the more you're able to communicate and recognize who they are and how they come about with themselves, the stronger and tighter bonds you could build with them. Now, as I mentioned, today is going to be a shorter episode. The key topic for today was becoming present. And I'll tell you what, I'll just leave you with these examples that I found over the last few months. I become more present with my children. How? When they come up to me, I drop what I'm doing. Or I tell them, hey, give me one more moment. Let me put this on pause. Put the phone away, and I look them right in the eyes, and we start having a conversation. I try not to interrupt them. I want them to fully express what it is that they're trying to say. Additionally, sometimes I seek them out where I will purposely stop what I'm doing, go find them, and see what they're up to. See if they'd like to plan something later on. Maybe it's going outside, maybe it's playing a game with other family members, or maybe it's, hey, let's go out on an outing where I could take one of them, because we have two kids, and we go do something fun that they want to do that they enjoy, whether if it's a sporting event, playing at a park, maybe we're taking them to practice, maybe it's just taking them to a grocery store so they could buy something else for someone else to give them as a gift, just something to do on a whim. I talked about being spontaneous before, and this is one way that you could start to build those things as well as develop characteristics and integrity for your kids. Now, same thing with significant others. Plan a date night, write stuff on a mirror, sit down and listen to them, right? That's the biggest thing that I think my wife has complained about is sometimes I'm not a big listener. I just like to talk over her. Well, I've been working on it and it's paying dividends. Is it anything that I've solved miraculously? No, it is a constant struggle to continue to interact and learn how to get better. You're not going to solve it overnight. And what you did today might not even work tomorrow. So you got to keep being creative at how you interact and do things that are going to get you noticed. And remember, it's all about being present. And then the third thing is in my career, corporate job, I spent a lot of time getting to know the people that report to me and those that I work around. It's not just about what projects they're working on, what challenges they have today, what roadblocks that they've come into, or different things that they need to do. The first 25 to 50% of all of our conversations is what is going on in their world. Where can I learn about them? What makes them tick? What makes them happy? What are the topics that they probably don't want to discuss that will get them out of their shell? Because you know what? When they feel that you have that connection and you could build that trust and build tighter relationships, they're going to be more productive in the things that you all are working towards, those common goals. So just think you could take any one of these strategies that I talked about today and implement it in any one of the relationships that you have. Each one will be beneficial at a different time, in a different place, and depending on what the scenario is or who's involved. So just think through that as you go, try to be present in all of your relationships because the goal is build that trust. You never know how far it's going to take, as well as when you need someone else's help, guess who's going to show up and help you. Thanks for tuning in. Send me a DM, like, subscribe, and share this episode with your friends and family. If you want to connect, find me on Facebook or Instagram, or as what you're doing right now, you're listening to the podcast or watching me on YouTube. Thank you. We'll be back next week.